The arrow whistled past Maverick's ear as he dove behind the overturned wagon, his heart hammering against his ribs. Chief Ayana's weathered hand gripped his wrist with surprising strength for a dying man. "Listen, white brother," the Apache leader wheezed, blood frothing at his lips. "My wives, Sahel and Itzal. They will be cast out when I die. Take them as your own, or they perish in the desert." Maverick's blue eyes widened. He'd come to negotiate safe passage through Apache territory, not inherit a dying man's family. Another volley of arrows from rival tribe warriors thudded into the wagon's wooden sides. "I can't just—" "You saved my son from the mountain lion," Ayana interrupted, his grip tightening. "Honor demands this debt. They are strong women, brave hearts, but tradition will see them starve." The shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, Maverick heard the soft footsteps of two women approaching through the dust and smoke. He looked up to see them Sahel, with raven hair braided with silver beads and eyes like polished obsidian. And Itzel younger, her copper. Skin glowing in the harsh desert sun, her gaze fierce yet vulnerable. "The Comanche retreat," Sahel said, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. "They took what they came for." Ayana's breathing grew more labored. "Swear it, Maverick Clearwater. Swear you will protect them." Maverick looked. Between the dying chief and the two women who stared at him with a mixture of hope and defiance, his cattle ranch barely supported himself, and he knew nothing about Apache customs or managing wives, let alone two of them. But something in their eyes, pride mixed with desperation, made his decision for him. "I swear it," he said. Ayana smiled, his grip finally loosening. "Good. Sahel knows healing herbs. Itzel can track anything that moves. You will need both skills in the coming days." His eyes found his wives one last time. "Be happy, my loves. This white man has an honorable heart." That Chief Ayana drew his last breath. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope. Sahel knelt beside her husband's body, beginning a low, mournful song. Itzel stood rigid, her dark eyes fixed on Maverick with undisguised suspicion. "You think because you spoke words to a dying man, we belong to you now?" She challenged her. Hand resting on the knife at her belt, Maverick slowly stood, removing his hat. "I think I just promised to keep two strong women from starving in the desert. What you do with that promise is up to you." Sahel finished her song and rose gracefully. "The tribal council will meet at sunset. If we remain here, we will be exiled. By dawn, your ranchette is far from here. 3 days hard ride northeast. Then we should bury our husband and leave before they return," Itzel said, her practical nature overriding her hostility. "The Comanche will tell others of this place." As they prepared Ayana's body according to Apache tradition, Maverick found himself stealing glances at both women. Sahel moved with quiet dignity, her knowledge of herbs evident as she prepared sacred plants for the burial ceremony. Itzel's sharp eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, and he noticed how she positioned herself to guard their backs. He was beginning to understand what Ayana meant about needing both their skills. The first night on the trail tested everyone's resolve. They'd ridden hard from the burial site, pushing their horses through rocky terrain that would mask their tracks. Now camped in a hidden canyon with barely enough water for the animals, tensions ran high. "Your ranch," Sahel said quietly, grinding. "Cornmeal between two stones. Tell us about it." Maverick poked at the small fire with a stick, keeping the flames low to avoid detection. "It's not much. It's a few hundred head of cattle, a cabin that needs repairs, and more debt than I care to." County glanced up at both women. "It's honest work, but it's hard living." Itzel snorted from where she kept watch on a rocky outcropping. "Harder than exile in the desert? Point taken." Maverick accepted the corn cake Sahel offered him, noting how she'd divided the meager food into exactly equal portions. Even in their desperate situation, she maintained the grace of a chief's wife. "There's something else you should know. It's a town nearby, ... Copper Creek. They're not exactly welcoming to people like us," like a Sahel's eyebrow arched.
"A white
rancher with 2 Apache wives isn't going to be anyone's idea of normal." Itzel dropped down from her perch with cat-like grace. We are not your wives. We are refugees under your protection. There is a difference. Try explaining that to a town full of settlers who've been fighting Apache raids for years. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air between them. Sahal busied herself organizing their supplies, while Itzel sharpened her knife with methodical precision. Maverick found himself admiring how neither woman complained about their situation. Even though their entire world had collapsed in a single day. There, Itzel said suddenly, pointing south. Smoke signals. Maverick squinted but saw nothing. Sahal, however, nodded grimly. The tribal council. They're telling other bands about us. What are they saying? Maverick asked. That 2 widows travel with a white man? Sahil translated. That we have abandoned our ways for the enemy. Die. Itzal's jaw tightened. They call us outcasts and betrayers in the same message. Then we ride harder tomorrow, Maverick decided. Once we reach my land, you'll be under the protection of territorial law, not tribal justice. That night, they took turns on watch. When Maverick's shift came, he found himself thinking about the impossible situation. He'd never imagined taking a wife, let alone 2 women, from a completely different culture. Yet as he watched Sahal sleep curled against the canyon wall, her face peaceful despite their circumstances, and Itzel maintaining perfect stillness while somehow staying alert even in rest, he felt a strange protectiveness growing in his chest. Dawn brought new challenges. Their water was nearly gone, and the horses showed signs of exhaustion. Worse, Itzel spotted dust clouds on the horizon riders following their trail. Comanche? Maverick asked. No, Sahal said, studying the distant figures with a spyglass she'd produced from her belongings. Apache. My husband's brother leads them. Maverick's blood ran cold. Family. Family with wounded pride, Itzel corrected. Kiosa never approved of his brother's friendship with whites. Now he sees his chance to restore tribal honor by bringing back the shamed widows. And me. Both women looked at him with expressions that said everything. Sahal finally spoke. Apache justice for a white man who steals tribal wives is not a pleasant death. Maverick checked his rifle and revolver, counting his ammunition. Then we'd better make sure they don't catch us. They broke camp in minutes, pushing their tired mounts through increasingly treacherous terrain. But by midday, it was clear the pursuing Apache were gaining ground. Their horses were fresher, and they knew the land better than Maverick ever could. Sure. Sahal pointed to a narrow pass between 2 towering rock formations. If we can reach the canyon beyond, there are caves. Places to hide. But as they approached the pass, Itzel held up her hand, signaling them to stop. Listen. In the distance, Maverick could hear it hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. They were trapped, with pursuers behind them and an unknown force ahead. The hoofbeats ahead belonged to a cavalry-patrolled welve dust-covered. Soldiers led by a grizzled sergeant who looked like he'd been fighting Indians since before Maverick was born. The moment they spotted the trio, rifles were raised and orders barked. Hold it right there, Sergeant Bronson called out, his weathered face grim beneath the brim of his campaign hat. State your business in this territory? Maverick raised his hand slowly, noting how Sahal and Itzel had gone perfectly still. Maverick Clearwater Rancher. These women are under my protection. Apache women, Bronson spat, his eyes hard. In case you haven't heard, Clearwater, we're in the middle of Apache trouble. Chief Ayana's band hit 3 ranches last month. Chief Ayana is dead, Sahil said quietly, her English perfect but accented. These are his wives. The sergeant's expression shifted from hostility to calculating interest. Dead, you say? When? 2 days ago, Maverick replied. I was there when he died. Behind them, the dust cloud of their Apache pursuers was getting closer. Bronson noticed it too, and his tactical mind immediately grasped the situation. Seems you folks are caught between a rock and a hard place, he observed. Those Apache. Back they're friends of yours? Former family, Itzel said, her voice bitter. Come to reclaim what they see as stolen property. Bronson studied the approaching riders through his field glasses. I count 15 warriors. Good horses, war paint. He lowered the glasses and looked at Maverick. You got any proof, Ionis? Dead Sahal reached slowly into her medicine bag, producing an ornate silver armband inlaid with turquoise. He wore this at every tribal council. It has been passed down through 5 generations of chiefs. The sergeant recognized it immediately. Every cavalry officer in the territory knew Ayana's ceremonial regalia. Well, I'll be damned. He looked back at the pursuing warriors, then at Maverick and the 2 women. Here's what's going to happen. My patrol's heading to Fort Bliss with dispatches. You folks can ride with us as far as Copper Creek, but after that, you're on your own. What about them? Maverick nodded toward the approaching Apache. Let me handle that. Bronson turned to his men. Deploy skirmish line. Let's have a conversation with Chief Ayana's brother-in-law. What followed was a tense standoff as Kiosa and his warriors approached under a white flag. The Apache war leader was magnificent on horseback, tall, proud, with silver threading through his black hair and scars that spoke of many battles. His eyes burned with barely contained fury as he saw Sahal and Itzel, flanked by white soldiers. "Hey, have come for my brother's wives," Kiosa announced in English, his voice carrying clearly across the narrow space between the 2 groups. "These women are under the protection of territorial law," Bronson replied formally. "They came willingly with Mr. Clearwater here." Kiosa's gaze found Maverick, and the hatred there was palpable. A white man who steals Apache women brings war to his people. A white man who honors a dying chief's last request brings peace. Sahal interjected, her voice calm but firm. Ayana chose this path to save our lives. Ayana was weak in his final days, Kiosa snarled, corrupted by white friendship. Gitzel's hand moved toward her knife, but Sahal caught her wrist. Your brother was the strongest man I ever knew, she said, her voice carrying a dignity that made even the hard-bitten cavalry sergeant straighten slightly. Strong enough to put our welfare above tribal pride? The standoff stretched on, tension crackling in the desert air. Finally, Kiosa spoke again. The women may go, but know this. White men, you have made an enemy of the Apache nation, my brothers. Blood cries out for justice? Your brother died in peace, Maverick replied, surprising himself with his steady voice. Maybe that should count for something. Kiosa wheeled his horse around without another word, leading his warriors back the way they'd come. But his final look promised that this was far from over. The cavalry escort made good time to Copper Creek. But the reception there was everything Maverick had feared and worse. Word had somehow preceded them, and a crowd of hostile townspeople waited in the street outside the general store. That's far enough, Clearwater. Mayor Hutchins called out, a scowling crowd behind him. We won't have Apache squaws in our town. The crowd's hostility was a living thing, ugly and growing by the minute. Women clutched their children closer while men fingered rifle stocks and spoke in angry whispers. Mayor Hutchins stepped forward, his portly frame trying to project authority he didn't quite possess. Now see here, Clearwater, he blustered. We've had enough Indian trouble without you bringing it right to our doorstep. Maverick dismounted slowly, his hands visible but ready. These women aren't trouble, Mayor. They're refugees seeking protection. Under territorial law? Law. Doc Patterson pushed through the crowd, his medical bag in one hand and a bottle of whiskey in the other. What law says a man can collect Apache wives like trading cards? The law that says every person has the right to safe passage. Sahal spoke up, her dignified bearing making several of the townspeople shuffle uncomfortably. The same law that protects your families. Don't you lecture us about protection, squaw? Sneered Jake Morrison, the town's blacksmith. His massive arms crossed over his leather apron. Your people killed the Henderson family just last spring. My people, Itzel said coldly, finally speaking, buried Chief Ayana 2 days ago. The same chief who kept war parties from raiding this valley for 3 years. The crowd's murmur grew uglier. Someone shouted about good Indians and dead Indians, and Maverick saw the situation spiraling toward violence. Then an unexpected voice cut through the noise. That's enough. Widow Campbell stepped out of the crowd, her black dress stark against the dusty street. She was a small woman, but her late husband had been the town's first sheriff, and she commanded respect through sheer force of will. Ayana kept the peace, she said firmly. Every rancher in this valley knows it. These women had nothing to do with the Henderson killings. That was Victorio's bunch from down south. Stay out of this, Eulalia, Mayor Hutchins warned. Or what? You'll run me out of town too? Her gray eyes flashed. I've buried 3 husbands in this territory, Hutchins. 2 to Apache arrows and 1 to a white man's bullet in a bar fight. Don't lecture me about who the real threats are. The crowd wavered, uncertain. Widow Campbell had earned her reputation through decades of survival in harsh country, and her word carried weight. Doc Patterson stepped forward, swaying slightly from his afternoon whiskey. Let me look at them, he said, his professional curiosity. Overcoming his prejudice? They're carrying diseases, or we are not livestock to be inspected? Sahal said quietly, but her meaning was clear. No, Maverick agreed, they're not. Mayor, we'll be moving on to my ranch come morning. Tonight we just need supplies and a place to rest our horses. The livery stable's closed to you, Morrison declared. And Henderson's store won't sell. 2 Indian sympathizers. Widow Campbell spoke up again. My barn has empty stalls. My late husband's store. She nodded toward a building that had been shuttered since the previous winter, still has basic supplies. The generosity surprised everyone, including Maverick. Ma'am, I can't ask you to. You're not asking? I'm offering. Her gaze swept the crowd. Seems to me Christian charity doesn't depend on the color of a person's skin. That evening, as they settled in Widow Campbell's barn, Maverick found himself alone with the 2 women. For the first time since leaving the Apache burial ground, Sohail was treating a small cut on his arm where a branch had scraped him during their flight, her touch gentle and sure. Why did you really agree to my husband's request? She asked quietly, not looking up from her work. Maverick considered lying. Giving some noble reason about honor and duty, instead he told the truth. Because I've been alone on that ranch for 3 years, and loneliness makes you do strange things. Because your husband saved my life once, and I owed him. And because... He paused, watching Eitzel organize their meager supplies with military efficiency. Because something about the way you both face trouble makes me want to be a better man than I am. Eitzel looked up from her work, studying his face in the lamplight. Better how? Braver, maybe. More honest, less selfish. He gestured toward the town beyond the barn walls. I've lived here 5 years, and Widow Campbell showed more spine in 10 minutes than I've managed in all that time. Sohail finished bandaging his arm. Courage grows with practice, like any skill. Your husband was the bravest man I ever met. No, she corrected gently. He was the most frightened man I ever met, but he never let fear choose his path. Outside, they could hear voices in the street townspeople, still arguing about the unwelcome visitors. Some called for the sheriff to run them out. Others worried about Apache retaliation if the women were harmed. Eitzel moved to the barn door, peering through a crack. 3 men with rifles watching the street. They mean to cause trouble. Maverick checked his weapons. Then we leave before dawn. Running away? Sahal asked. Choosing our battles, he corrected. Your husband taught me that too. They left Copper Creek in the pre-dawn darkness, but not before Widow Campbell pressed a canvas bag into Sahal's hands. Coffee, flour, salt, pork, she whispered. And this. She added a small leather pouch. Silver coins. You'll need them more than I do. We cannot repay this kindness, Sahal protested, and pass it on to someone else someday. The older woman's eyes were fierce in the lamplight. That's how goodness stays alive in hard country. The ride to Maverick's ranch took them through increasingly desolate terrain. Red rock mesas gave way to rolling grassland dotted with cattle bearing his MC brand. As the sun climbed higher, revealing the scope of his property, both women remained silent, but he could feel their assessment. Of his claims, not much to look at, he admitted, as they topped a ridge and saw the weathered buildings below a modest cabin, a leaning barn, corrals that needed mending, and a windmill that squeaked in the morning breeze. It is water, Eitzel observed, noting. The creek that meandered through the property. Good grass. The cattle look healthy? Defensible position, Sahal added, her strategic mind already working, sightlines in all directions. As they rode into the yard, Maverick felt embarrassed. by the cabin's shabby condition. The roof needed patching, the porch sagged, and one window was boarded up, where a winter storm had broken the glass. Inside would be worse. 3 years of bachelor living had left its mark. "I wasn't expecting company," he said awkwardly, dismounting. By the front porch, Itzel tied her horse to the rail with quick, efficient movements. "We have lived in wickiups and beneath the stars. Your roof and walls will seem like luxury." But when he opened the door, revealing the chaos within and washed dishes, clothes scattered everywhere, a thick layer of dust on every surface, both women stopped short. Sahal recovered first. "Perhaps we should start with the barn," she suggested. "Diplomatically, the horses need care, and we can plan from there." As they tended to the animals, Maverick found himself studying his companions in the familiar setting of his ranch. Sahal moved among the horses with natural grace, her healing knowledge extending to animal care. She examined each mount's hooves and legs, applying a poultice to a small cut on her mare's fetlock. Itzel, meanwhile, had found his rifle collection and was methodically checking each weapon's condition. "This Winchester needs cleaning," she reported. "The Spencer's trigger mechanism is loose, and this," she held up an old Sharps rifle. "This needs a complete overhaul. You know guns? Apache women learn to shoot when they learn to walk. Our lives depend on it. Work the Winchesters. Action with expert hands. Your defenses are adequate for cattle thieves, poor for war parties." That afternoon, they tackled the cabin. Maverick had expected awkwardness, cultural conflicts, or at least complaints about the primitive conditions. Instead, he found himself swept along in a whirlwind of organized activity. Sahal took charge of the kitchen, transforming chaos into order with an efficiency that amazed him. She identified which pots and pans were salvageable, which dishes needed to be scrubbed or thrown out, somehow made sense of his haphazard food supplies. It's all focused on security and repairs. She fixed the sagging porch step, rehung the cabin door so it latched properly, and created weapon caches at strategic points around the property. Her knowledge of carpentry was limited, but practically everything she did had a purpose. By evening, the cabin was transformed. Not fancy, but clean and functional. Sahal had prepared a meal from their meager supplies that somehow tasted better than anything Maverick had eaten in months. They sat around his battered kitchen table in the golden light of oil lamps. Domestic scenes strange but comfortable. "Tomorrow we need to ride fence," Maverick said, trying to plan their new life together. "Check the herd, see what winter damage needs repair." "We?" Itzel asked. "Your partners now, whether you like it or not. This ranch succeeds or fails based on all our work." Sahal poured coffee from the pot, her movements graceful, even with the chipped cups. "And if we choose to leave, if we decide this arrangement isn't working?" Maverick met her eyes steadily. "Then you leave with my blessing, enough supplies for wherever you want to go. And my promise that you'll always have a place here if you need it. Even if it means you lose the ranch, even then." He was surprised by his own certainty. "Your husband asked me to protect you, not imprison you." That night they worked out sleeping arrangements. The cabin had only 2 rooms, Maverick's bedroom, and the main room that served as kitchen, dining, and sitting area. Without discussion, the women claimed the bedroom while Maverick made up a bedroll by the fireplace as he lay listening to their quiet conversation through the thin wooden wall. He found himself thinking about the impossible situation they'd all fallen into, 3 people from different worlds, thrown together by circumstance and bound by a dying man's wish. It shouldn't work, but somehow, it was starting to feel like home. Spring brought both promise and peril to the Clearwater Ranch. The cattle had survived winter better than expected, and under Sahal's guidance, they'd planted a kitchen garden that was already showing green shoots. Itzel had proven invaluable at tracking down strays, and had even helped birth several calves. But their peaceful routine was shattered on a warm April morning when riders appeared on the eastern ridge. 6 men, Itzel reported from her lookout post atop the barn. Armed, moving slow and deliberate. Maverick raised his field glasses, studying the approaching party. He recognized the lead rider immediately. Kiosa, Ayana's brother, had kept his promise to return. But these weren't Apache warriors. The men with him were a mix of white renegades and Mexican bandits. The kind of hired guns who'd work for anyone with silver to pay them. Trouble? Sahal asked, emerging from the cabin, where she'd been grinding corn. The worst kind. Maverick lowered his glasses. Mixed band of cutthroats led by someone who thinks he has a legitimate grievance. They had perhaps 10 minutes before the riders reached the ranch house. Hal disappeared inside, returning moments later with their weapons. She'd learned to handle Maverick's spare rifle with deadly accuracy over the past months, while Itzel preferred her traditional bow alongside a borrowed revolver. 6 against 3, Itzel mused, testing her bowstring. Poor odds for them. Despite their desperate situation, Maverick found himself smiling. These women had transformed from refugees into warriors over the course of a few months. Their confidence was infectious. The riders approached under no flag of truce. Osa sat his horse with regal bearing, but his companions were clearly mercenaries, hard men, with cold eyes and well-used weapons. They stopped just outside rifle range, making their intentions clear. "Clearwater," Kiosa called out. "You have something that belongs to my people. Return what was stolen, and we will let you live." "Nothing here was stolen," Maverick replied, stepping onto his front porch where his voice would carry. "Everything was given freely by your brother as he died." Dying man's words, corrupted by white lies. This time it was Sahil who answered, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. "Your brother was more honorable than you will ever be, Kiosa. He chose protection for his wives over tribal pride." The Apache leader's face darkened with rage. "You've been corrupted by the white man's bed. You are no longer Apache." "Then, why do you want us back?" Itzel called out from her position near the barn. The question hung in the air like a challenge. One of Kiosa's hired guns, a Mexican with silver conscious on his vest, spat tobacco juice and spoke up. "Enough talk. We came for women and silver. Let's take both and be done." Kiosa raised his hand for silence, but the damage was done. Maverick now understood this wasn't about tribal honor or Apache law. Kiosa had fallen in with bandits, and they expected to profit from this expedition. "Last chance, Clearwater," the Apache leader called. "Send out the women, and we'll take only them." Maverick's answer was to lever around into his Winchester's chamber. The metallic sound carried clearly across the yard, and both sides understood that talking was finished. The attack came from 3 directions. Classic Apache tactics modified by the bandits' more direct approach. 2 men circled toward the barn, while Kiosa and another rode straight at the house. The Mexican and his partner tried to flank around the creek. Sahil's first shot dropped the Mexican from his saddle before he'd covered half the distance to the creek. Her second shot spooked his partner's horse, sending the man tumbling into the water. Itzel's arrows found their mark with silent efficiency. Taking down one of the barn attackers before he knew he was being targeted, Maverick found himself in a direct confrontation with Kiosa, the Apache leader bearing down on him with rifle raised. But 3 months of daily practice had improved Maverick's marksmanship considerably. His shot took Kiosa's horse in the chest, sending both rider and mount crashing to the ground in a tangle of legs and dust. The surviving attackers broke off their assault, regrouping beyond rifle range. Of the original 6, only 3 remained effective, Kiosa shaken but uninjured from his fall, and 2 of his hired guns. "This isn't over," Kiosa shouted as they withdrew. "I will return with more men. You do that?" Itzel called back. "We'll be waiting." As the defeated raiders disappeared over the ridge, the 3 defenders gathered in the ranch yard to assess the damage. 1 horse was dead, several chickens had scattered, and there were bullet holes in the barn wall, but no one was injured. "They'll be back," Sahal observed matter-of-factly, beginning to collect the arrows she'd retrieved from the fallen attackers. With more men, Maverick agreed. "And now that word's out about our situation, we'll have other troubles too. Hunters, army patrols, maybe more Apache bands looking to settle scores." Itzel was examining the weapons left behind by the dead bandits. Good rifles, plenty of ammunition. They came prepared for a fight. That evening, as they buried the dead horses and fortified their defenses, the reality of their situation became Clear, they were no longer just an unusual family trying to build a life together. They were outlaws by association, targets for anyone seeking Apache scalps or the bounty that would inevitably be placed on their heads. We could still run, Maverick said as they sat around the kitchen table, planning their next moves. California. Maybe Oregon. Start over where nobody knows our story. Sahal shook her head. Running only delays the problem. Sooner or later, we have to make a stand. Besides, Itzel added, cleaning her rifle with methodical precision, this land is good. The water is sweet, the grass is rich. Why should we let fear drive us from our home? Our home. The words hit Maverick harder than he'd expected. Somewhere in the past few months, without anyone formally acknowledging it, they'd become a family. Not the family he'd imagined as a young man, but something stronger and stranger and more precious than he'd ever dared hope for. Summer brought a fragile piece to the Clearwater Ranch, but also an unexpected visitor. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell arrived in a dusty buggy on a blazing July afternoon. Her medical bag and determined expression suggesting this wasn't a social call. "Mr. Clearwater," she said, declining his offer to help her down from the buggy. "I'm the new territorial health inspector. I'm here to investigate reports of an irregular household situation." Maverick exchanged glances with Sahal and Itzel, who'd emerged from the garden where they'd been harvesting vegetables. Both women wore simple calico dresses they'd sewn themselves, their hair arranged in practical styles that somehow still maintained their natural beauty. "What kind of investigation?" he asked carefully. Dr. Hartwell was a severe-looking woman in her 40s, dressed in practical traveling clothes that marked her as someone unaccustomed to frontier life. Reports suggest you're living in an improper arrangement with two Apache women. The territorial government is concerned about health implications. Health. Sahal stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. Her English had become even more polished over the months. "Doctor, I'd be happy to answer any medical questions you might have." Health inspector looked surprised by Sahal's educated response. "You speak English well, for a way. For someone of your background." "I was educated at the mission school," Sahal replied calmly.
Oh.
"I speak 4 languages and have extensive knowledge of both traditional healing and modern medical practices." Dr. Hartwell's expression shifted from suspicion to professional interest. "Indeed, what can you tell me about the medicinal properties of desert willow?" What followed was a 40-minute discussion between the two women that covered everything from wound treatment to obstetrics. Maverick watched the health inspector's attitude transform from bureaucratic suspicion to genuine respect as Sahal demonstrated knowledge that rivaled any trained nurse. Meanwhile, Itzel had been showing off the improvements she'd made to the ranch's water system, a clever arrangement of channels and filters that provided clean water to both house and livestock. Her practical engineering skills impressed even the skeptical Dr. Hartwell. "This is quite remarkable," the inspector admitted as they toured the property. "The cleanliness standards here exceed most established households I've visited. The food. Storage is properly managed. Waste disposal is sanitary. And the medical preparations are, well, they're better organized than some hospitals I've seen." That evening, Dr. Hartwell accepted their invitation to dinner, and the conversation revealed more about their visitor than her official capacity might suggest. "I apologize for my initial assumptions," she said as Sahal served a meal that would have done credit to any fine restaurant. "The territorial government has been receiving complaints about this household for months. Most painted a picture of, well, something quite different from reality." "What kind of complaints?" Maverick asked. "The usual prejudices, moral arrangements, health hazards, concern about Apache influence on local ranchers." Dr. Hartwell tasted Itzel's wild berry preserves and nodded appreciatively. "I was expecting to find squalor and degeneracy. Instead, I find a model household that many so-called civilized families would do well to emulate." As the weeks passed, Dr. Hartwell's visits became regular occurrences. She claimed to be conducting ongoing health inspections, but it became clear she genuinely enjoyed the intellectual company of the two Apache women. Sahal's medical knowledge fascinated her, While Itzel's practical skills and engineering innovations provided solutions to problems Dr. Hartwell encountered throughout her territory. More importantly, Dr. Hartwell's official reports began reaching influential ears in the territorial capital. Her documentation of the household's exemplary conditions, combined with detailed accounts of the women's skills and education, started changing official attitudes. The breakthrough came in early autumn, when a delegation of territorial officials arrived for an unexpected visit. Among them was Judge Morrison, not the hostile blacksmith from Copper Creek, but his brother, a respected territorial judge who'd heard Dr. Hartwell's reports and wanted to see for himself. "Mr. Clearwater," Judge Morrison said as he surveyed the prosperous ranch, "I understand you've made some unusual domestic arrangements." "Yes, sir," Maverick replied carefully. "And these arrangements have caused considerable controversy in the surrounding communities." "Yes, sir." The judge studied the two women who stood beside Maverick with quiet dignity. "Ladies, are you here of your own free will?" "We are, Your Honor," Sahal answered for both of them. "You consider yourselves married to Mr. Clearwater?" "Under Apache law?" Sahal and Itzel exchanged a glance. This was the question they'd all been avoiding for months. The formal definition of their relationship that had evolved from desperate necessity into something deeper and more complex. "Your Honor," Sahal said carefully, "when my husband Ayanna was dying, he asked Mr. Clearwater to protect us from tribal exile. What has grown from that promise?" She looked at Maverick, then at Itzel. "What has grown is a partnership built on mutual respect, shared hardship, and genuine affection." Itzel stepped forward slightly. "We three have become family through choice, not just circumstance. Whether territorial law recognizes that bond is less important than the reality we've created together?" Judge Morrison nodded slowly. "Dr. Hartwell's reports speak highly of your household management and community contributions. She particularly notes your medical assistance during the cholera outbreak in Copper Creek last month." "If you were dying," Sahal said simply. "Healing knows no boundaries of race or politics." "Indeed." The judge consulted his papers. "I'm prepared to issue an official territorial recognition of this household as a legitimate domestic arrangement, provided certain conditions are met." Maverick felt his heart skip. "What conditions, Your Honor?" "First, formal registration of the property deed in all three names. Second, demonstration of economic viability, which your cattle operation clearly provides. Third, continued community service as evidenced by Dr. Hartwell's documentation. And fourth," Itzel asked, sensing there was more. Judge Morrison smiled slightly. "Fourth, I'd like to see this arrangement formalized in a manner that satisfies both territorial law and personal conscience. Dr. Hartwell has suggested a unique ceremony that would blend legal marriage requirements with Apache traditions, too." Weeks later, on a crisp October morning, the strangest wedding ceremony in territorial history took place in the meadow beside Clearwater Creek. Judge Morrison presided, while Dr. Hartwell served as witness. Widow Campbell had traveled from Copper Creek with several other townspeople who'd come to respect the unusual family over the months. The ceremony itself was a careful blend of traditions. Maverick exchanged vows with both women according to territorial land arrangement the judge had quietly made legal through careful interpretation of marriage statutes. Sahal and Itzel incorporated Apache traditions of partnership and shared responsibility, binding all three together in a covenant that honored both cultures as they stood together beside the creek. Hands joined in a circle, Maverick reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, he'd been a lonely bachelor, struggling to keep a failing ranch afloat. Now he was part of a family that defied convention, but somehow worked perfectly. "Do you think Ayanna would approve?" asked Sahal quietly as they watched their few guests enjoy the wedding feast she'd prepared. "My first husband was a wise man," she replied, her hand warm in his. "He saw something in you that you hadn't yet discovered in yourself." "What was that?" Itzel answered from his other side, her voice soft with contentment. "The capacity to love without trying to possess, to protect without trying to control, lead by serving." As the sun set over their land now, legally and truly, Maverick pulled both women closer. The challenges weren't over. There would always be those who disapproved of their arrangement, always dangers in the wild territory they called home. But they'd proven they could face anything together. The next morning brought news that would test that resolve one final time. A rider brought word that the territorial governor himself was planning a visit, along with a delegation of Eastern politicians interested in progressive domestic arrangements on the frontier. More inspections? It's the last, watching. The messenger disappeared down the trail. No, Maverick said, studying the official letter. Recognition. They want to document our success as an example of how different cultures can work together. Sahal laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the valley. From outlaws to examples in less than a year, Ayana would definitely approve. As they walked back toward the house, their home. Their life together, Maverick marveled at how love could grow in the most unlikely soil. Three people from different worlds, brought together by tragedy and bound by choice, had created something beautiful and lasting in the harsh frontier landscape. The cattle needed tending. The winter preparations weren't finished, and there would always be more challenges ahead, but they'd face them together as partners, as family, as proof that love could indeed conquer the seemingly impossible. And in the distance, carried on the desert wind, Maverick could swear he heard the sound of an Apache death song transforming into a celebration of new life beginning.